And we are live. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to another live chat at the Tea Crane. Last week, we also did an extensive live chat, and if you haven't watched that, it's still available on YouTube or on Facebook, whichever channel you're watching. I'm Tias Solsen for the Tea Crane, and today with me is Linnea, as well as last week. But today I intend to hear a little bit more about what got you interested in Japanese tea, and also, well, what attracts you really in Japanese tea, and why you're so passionate about it. So tell us.
I think it's probably a pretty similar story to most other people who've gotten involved in tea. When I first went to university, I was in a new town. I was away from, my family and all of my high school friends, and I was taking Japanese classes. And one of my classmates, who later became one of my closest friends, invited me to this tea house that she liked. She had been drinking tea for a really long time. And there was this tea house near the university that just had a really nice atmosphere. It was very cozy, and the two of us would go there almost after every class, which was at least once a week. And we would just go there and we would study, and we would have probably 3 or 4 pots of tea over a couple of hours. We'd study and talk and practice our Japanese. And that's when I really started getting into tea. But at that point, I still wasn't really all that knowledgeable about, different kinds of tea. It was really just a social thing at that point.
That was more a general kind of tea, like
right.
Worldwide, not specifically focused on either Chinese teas or Japanese teas, or
right. The tea shop had both Chinese and Japanese teas, and kind of all around the world kind of teas. I don't think we really specifically drank one kind or another. But yeah, at that point, like I said, it was mostly just for the social experience that I started really liking it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I started buying my own teas, and started sort of realizing, like, oh, I really like this one. I don't really like this one so much. And I only like this one if I add sugar to it, or what, mostly herbal teas.
Big taboo.
Yeah, I know. And I guess I didn't really start getting more knowledgeable about tea and, kinds of tea and how it's grown, and more of the kind of history, if you will, until I moved to Japan a couple years ago. And I started working at a travel agency. And that was right before the pandemic started. So we kind of just closed.
Right, not a good time to
yeah,
start
it wasn't
working
a good time.
The travel industry.
It really was not.
Especially because in Japan now we've got
no tourists.
No tourists at all. Borders closed for 2 years. No one.
Yes.
It's amazing still to see actually that in Kyoto some new hotels are still opening up.
I was very surprised at that. Yeah.
Like one is about to open.
Yeah.
Like they're very much looking forward to tourism picking up again.
Yep. I think it's going to be this year. I think they're going to kind of let people start coming in, even if it's not.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
I
hope so.
Yeah. Same for the Tea Crane, really, because I opened in August 2020, which is like half a year after the pandemic kicked in. And it's, since been very quiet here. I've had a few, most of the customers are Japanese customers, but really for an international audience, I've, had to stay focused on the online aspect of the Tea Crane's tea sales. So, yeah, for tourism, it's really
it wasn't good timing for anyone. And of course, at the point that it started, we were thinking it was going to be maybe 2 months, 3 months, and then Corona was going to be, everything was going to be back to normal.
Yeah, didn't they say like 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Is that not where it started?
I believe that is exactly
it's a long 2 weeks.
what they said. yeah, that was 2 years ago now. Anyway, so yeah, I was sort of doing some research on things that you could do around Kyoto, that you could do around Japan, that we could sort of integrate into work. And since I was interested in tea, and I didn't think anyone else in the company really was, it's a very small company, I focused on tea-related experiences and tours, which of course there's plenty in Uji, in that region around Kyoto.
Right, yes.
And
they're developing too. There's a whole new area, a whole new building as well for tourist activities and with different types of experiences, pottery experiences, tea tasting experience, tea brewing experiences, etc.
That's in Uji?
That's in Uji too, yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. I'll have to visit sometimes.
Everyone do, because soon the borders of Japan are going to be open.
Yeah, they're working.
Fingers.
They're sort of gradually doing it. I think they're open to students now and short-term business travelers, which it was open for a little bit and then Omicron happened, so then the borders closed again, and now it's back open to specific visas.
So for tourist visas, we'll just have to stick it out a little bit longer, but probably soon enough.
Hopefully, yeah.
Let's hope. Maybe. Well, I don't know if we'll be in time for the sakura season, but let's hope we'll.
I think that's what they're aiming for.
Yeah, April. See you in April.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, and from there,
I guess it was
what triggered you to really dig deep in Japanese tea? And what caught your interest in the first place when you were looking at specific types of Japanese teas? You were looking for tours.
Well, like I said, I was kind of I considered it sort of my specialization within the company, because I had been, discovering my own favorite teas and such, and what teas I liked and didn't like for a couple of years. And actually, it was when my friend was visiting me in Kyoto, the tea friend that introduced me to tea. She also lives in Japan, but she lives in Nagasaki Prefecture. So
it's a ways out.
A ways out, yeah. And right around the time the tea crane was opening, she came to visit, and we had an experience scheduled just down the street at the what was it called? It's like the.
Is that the incense place, or
not the
are
incense
you referring
place.
To the Toraya sweet store?
No, it was the braided bracelets. What is it called now? I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
Kumihimo, with the cords, and you have the circular thing. Yeah, we hadn't really planned what we wanted to do, so that was one of the only experiences that we could do, we could reserve for the same day. And we were kind of we were kind of in a hurry on the way there, but on the way back, we were kind of, looking around, and we saw this tea shop, and we both stopped.
That's how we met.
That's how we met. We saw it at the same time, and we stopped, and we were like, oh, wow, this looks amazing. It's tea, and it's, but, too bad it's not open yet.
A few days before I was officially opening in August 2020.
Yeah, I mean, TS just happened to be in the store and heard us talking outside and came and invited us to have some tea.
And said, let's have some tea, and we started chatting.
We started talking. It
was good.
Yeah, and then I started coming here, I guess maybe every couple of months, not that often yet, but it was last year around this time. One of the experiences, the tours that I had been researching a long time ago, started looking for volunteers because they needed help, and they usually have interns from within Japan, but nobody was coming, so they were looking for volunteers. So I went and volunteered at this place in Uji, in Wazuka, actually. And after that, what was it? It was after that I started helping out here, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So before that, I think we were mostly just sharing tea and sharing stories.
Yeah.
And talking a bit about different types of tea, and doing some little bit of tea. Should we call it education?
Yeah, tea education. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's when I really started getting into, I guess more how it's made and really the specifics of tea. I think it was actually, we were packaging tea at the place where I was volunteering, and T.S. came to visit since he lived near there.
Tend to visit tea farmers often.
Yeah, he tended, and he lived really close to there. And we were packaging tea, and we had this machine that did it automatically where you could seal the bags.
Right.
And I think he said, like, oh, mine isn't automatic. You have to do it manually.
Yeah. And
then started saying, like, hey, well, you should come help me if you have free time after you come back to Kyoto, if you go back to finish volunteering.
and that's where we are now. Well, no, great. But what attracts you really in the aspect of tea, or should we say Japanese tea?
Like I said, at first it was the social aspect. And then once I started getting into it, it was sort of simultaneously attracting about tea and intimidating about tea, was that there's so many different kinds, and it's so diverse. And even after considering all of the different kinds of tea, all the different regions, the different brewing methods, you can get so many different flavors out of the same tea if you just brew it a slightly different way. If you change the ratio of tea to water, if you change the temperature, the brewing time, you can just get so many different flavors out of the same tea. And it's really like, you can really just make what you want out of tea. If you want it a little sweeter that day, or if you want it a little more astringent or lighter. And
right.
Which was a little bit intimidating at first, but now that I've kind of gotten a little bit more used to it, it's definitely.
Yeah, I think we talked about that last week, didn't we? The different ways of brewing. But then again, there's so many different types of tea as well. Yeah. And within those different types of tea, there's, again, a huge variety, especially if you look at non-blended types, which is something that I like to do. And I guess we'll be talking about that then today.
Yep.
Well, as a matter of introduction and getting started, we'll first start brewing some tea. And I always like to put the dry tea leaf in a warmed up yuzu so that the aroma starts to release. And you can already get a little bit of an anticipation of what it's going to turn out like, or just get a better appreciation for the aroma of the tea leaf itself. Now, although we've been talking a little bit too long, it's a kabusecha that we're going to be brewing now. And for kabusecha, it's always preferred to lower the water temperature a little.
Right.
Now, I don't like lowering the water temperature too much, because if you lower it too much, you lose a lot of the aroma. So I like to retain a slightly higher temperature. And with this one too, I'm just going to cool it down just a little bit to not really scorch the leaf in the first infusion, and extract more of its amino flavors than its bitters. But overall, this kabusecha, you could actually just brew it straight up with boiling water. And then, of course, you infuse it for a shorter period.
And Gyokuro is usually even lower temperatures. Is that right?
Yes. Gyokuro is mostly focused on, producing a lot of umami flavors. So reducing the amount of bitterness and getting as much umami flavor as possible. So when you brew it, then you also want to focus on extracting that umami. But then there are different types of Gyokuro as well. And you could say for the first brew, you lower the temperature sufficiently, but then for the successive brews, you just add a bit more temperature. And by the end, you just brew it absolutely scorching hot. But it's all related to preference. If you like your tea more intense in flavor, then of course you make the necessary adjustments. If you want to enjoy Gyokuro, as people say you should enjoy it, then that's of course also fine. So everyone, I think, has their own preferences to it.
Yes. It's the nice thing about tea, preferences, and really make your own.
We had a question, I think, on Instagram. Can you read that question out again?
Right. So the question was, what part of the process differentiates green tea and black tea? Is it, for example, the cultivating process before it's harvested, the post-harvest processing, or the breed of the tea plants, or the cultivar? I'm not sure if that's technically a breed, or the way it's brewed. And the answer was the process after it's harvested is what makes it green tea versus black tea.
Yeah. So for everyone who's watching, surprise, surprise, from the same tea tree, you can actually make all the different kinds of tea that exist. You can make white tea, you can make yellow tea, you can make green tea, you make black tea, you make oolong, you make hojicha, roasted tea, you make all different kinds of tea from just one single tea bush. Now, I think we'll get into some cultivar related aspects as well later.
Yes.
But technically, if you have one tea tree, you can make all different kinds of tea. And how green tea, and in that category, we include kabusecha, gyokuro, sencha, kamairicha, all those types. In green tea, and black tea is mostly the oxidized, fermented teas. So the difference is really after the harvesting, you oxidize, ferment the tea, you process it in a different way for black tea as opposed to green tea.
It's mostly the oxidation is what makes it the two different kinds of tea.
Yes.
More or less.
We'll try to keep it very simple this time, and I won't go too deep. Maybe later I'll expand a little bit. But green tea, technically, when it's harvested, it's brought into the factory and it's heat processed immediately. So it's steamed for sencha. For pan-fire teas, it's usually heated in a frying pan. But so it's heat processed immediately after the harvest. With oolong teas, black teas, other oxidized or fermented teas, there's a withering and fermentation process that happens after the harvest. And with oolong, and often with black tea as well, to halt that oxidation process, there's another heat treating stage. And of course, within black tea, again, we can go deeper and look at the different stages of oxidation fermentation. Because it's not just, you let it oxidize for 100% and then it's black tea. Now, there's also a little bit of a gradation there. And where do you want to hold that oxidation to get the best flavors out of it? So there's a whole aspect to that as well. But technically, oxidation, post-process, or the processing after the harvest is what makes it different.
And is there any sort of standard what oxidation looks like? Do they spread it out on a plate and they leave it for 2 weeks, or what does it look like?
Contemporarily, most of it is it's a shelf type structure, sort of a chamber that is heat and moisture controlled.
Oh, I imagine that's very important. Heat and moisture.
So the moisture and the heat really affect the way the tea leaf ferments.
Thank you.
But oftentimes before that, there's another withering stage.
Right.
And the withering happens both outdoors as indoors. So first it's just left overnight outdoors to start to wilt. If you pick a leaf from a tea tree and you hold it for a while, you see that it will start to sort of
wither,
shrink. And that's also where it starts to lose a lot of its moisture. So initiating a lot of the producers that I work with, really, and I think that's a very interesting thing to mention, tea manufacturing is nothing other then extracting the moisture that is present in the freshly harvested leaf and producing a dried leaf.
Through the various ways of...
And then there's various ways of doing that. And figuring out how to best extract that moisture is something that keeps most producers, active when they're doing tea manufacturing. So this withering stage is very important because naturally the tea leaf already starts to lose some of that moisture, and you don't have to do anything for it. So even for green tea, a lot of the tea producers that I know like to work with this withering stage, although briefly, so that the tea leaf can become more tender. Because when it's fresh and stiff and you immediately throw it into a kneading machine, then you might actually tear it up. And you, of course, don't want to have that happen.
Yeah. So, very delicate process. So what's the tea that we're drinking now?
It's that kabusecha that we looked at earlier. And how do you like
it? Very good. It's very dimensional flavor. It's got some umami and a little bit of astringency, a little bit of sweetness.
It's good.
It is.
So it's from Asamiya, the same as the one we've got our different senchas from. And
all right, so you said you're mentioning sencha. How is sencha different than kabusecha?
How is sencha different from kabusecha? That's a good one. Let's look at green tea in the bigger picture to begin. Let's focus on kabusecha, sencha, and gyokuro. Those three types, they're often mentioned. The interesting thing is that after harvest, the processing for those three types is largely the same. The same sequence and the same machines are used for both sencha, kabusecha, and gyokuro.
So it's the pre-harvest.
So it's the pre-harvest cultivation that differs. And for sencha, most often, the tea trees, they're just grown on the mountain flanks or on the tea farm, and nothing special is done to them. They're just being grown, and when they're ready, they're harvested. But for kabusecha and for gyokuro, and also for matcha, the tea trees are shaded. So these plastic cheesecloth covers are rolled out over the tea bushes, and for kabusecha, often they are just put on the tea bushes immediately. For gyokuro, you might have a shelf-type structure, and for matcha, really, that is most often the case. So you have a shelf that is a bit raised above the tea trees.
And you can walk into it and
you can walk underneath it. So then again, for kabusecha and gyokuro, what is the difference there? Is that for kabusecha, the tea trees are shaded for 14 days. For gyokuro, it's 3 to 4 weeks. And for matcha, it's a month to sometimes a little bit over a month. So those are the three main types. And for kabusecha and gyokuro, the difference really is the duration with which the tea trees are shaded. Then we, of course, also need to know, because I said that the processing after harvest is the same. But, well, the sequence and the machines that are used are the same, but the timings aren't.
Right.
Because if you shade the tree, then the leaf will also become more tender. The longer you shade it, well, imagine that you cover a tree, and a tree really to grow needs photosynthesis. It needs a lot of sunlight. We too need a lot of sunlight. So if you shut out that sunlight, that is going to affect your health and your development. Now, for gyokuro especially, we don't want the tea to develop. We want to keep the leaf tender and sweet, like a baby.
So that's the shading process makes it a little sweeter, is that right?
So the shading process, what it does is, well, first let's have a look at what photosynthesis does. Photosynthesis takes the amino acids that are in the fresh young leaf, and transfers that into catechin. Amino acids are sweetness, umami components. Catechins are bitterness components.
Like we talked about last week.
So through photosynthesis, this sweetness changes into bitterness. The leaf also gets to develop, and it grows bigger and sturdier. That's what the leaf wants to do.
Yes.
So it matures really. And we don't want that to happen.
And then the post-harvest processing also has to accommodate for a more delicate leaf.
Yes.
For
so
Gyokuro.
With Gyokuro, you're treating these tender, baby-like leaves, and you can't knead it as heavily as you do with sencha, or as long, or you can't use as much temperature, because then the leaf will sort of dissolve, and if it's too fragile, then it might just kind of evaporate almost.
Definitely don't want that.
So those little changes do have to be made to the processing process, but mainly for green tea types, the shading is what matters most.
So we talked about matcha a little bit too. How is that different than Gyokuro, other than the shading? I think there's one obvious step of...
So matcha and Gyokuro are different in the way that the shading actually is pretty similar. So matcha is maybe just a little bit longer than Gyokuro, but the same type of leaf is used for both. Now, what makes matcha is that, first of all, you make tencha out of the leaf that you harvest. Matcha doesn't become matcha immediately. It becomes matcha only after the tencha leaf, which is the raw leaf material that is created through the production process, is pulverized. Then it becomes matcha.
Once it's the powder.
Yeah. So for everything before that, you talk about tencha. And so when the tencha leaf is harvested, it's not kneaded and rolled and beaten like sencha and kabusecha and gyokuro. For matcha, what happens is it is steamed like other green teas, and it's aired out so that the air that gets in contact with the leaf can sort of evaporate some of the moisture that is that remains on the surface of the leaf, and it also can make sure that the leaves are not clogged together. You want to make sure that they're as separate as possible, because after that they go through a almost 15-meter, 20-meter long oven in 3 tiers. So if the tea leaf it still contains moisture, then it will burn, because the oven inside is about 150 degrees Celsius. And if they're stuck together, they won't dry evenly. So that's what there's this juggling of leaf process, which is very spectacular to watch. But so after it went to that 3-tiered, or sometimes 4-tiered, some more advanced ovens are 4-tiered at this time. After it goes through that oven, then basically the tencha is ready. Only what needs to happen is the veins need to be filtered out, the twigs need to be filtered out, and the leaf needs to be chopped up a little bit. And sometimes you might need some extra moisture reduction, EA, drying.
Drying. All right, so we had a couple of questions of how is this other particular tea made. So while sencha and gyokuro and kabusecha generally are steamed and then heated and rolled into needles, how is, for example, kamairicha, how is that different than sencha?
Good. Kamairicha is good that you look at it in contrast to sencha, because the same type of tea tree is used.
Right.
For kamairicha also, you hardly ever shade the tea trees, because you want to obtain a leaf that has some sufficient bitterness, and mostly the fragrance is important with kamairicha. So the tea leaf that is used for kamairicha is after harvest. unlike sencha, not steamed, but fried in a big frying pan. And what that does is it doesn't add steam moisture to the leaf that then heat treats it. It actually heats the leaf up and allows it to release some of the moisture that it has inside, which then catches onto the scorching hot iron surface, which creates steam, in which the tea leaf is steamed.
So it steams with its own.
It's steamed in its own sap, so there's no addition of moisture. And one of the benefits that the Kamairicha producers that I work with has spoken about is that if you don't add moisture, you don't have to dry the leaf as much later on. So the processing process after the heat treatment can be much shorter. And you also created an opportunity for the leaf to release its saps, release its moisture through its natural pathways, through its veins. So you don't have to squeeze it out like you do with sencha.
Is there any particular flavor that is sort of identifies Kamairicha versus other types of green tea?
I would say definitely more the roasty aroma, because these kettles, these frying pans that are being used, they are usually used for generations, and so when the tea gives off its saps and they're then evaporated on the surface, of course a lot of tea residue remains. So there's a buildup of tea. What do you call that? In Japanese, you call that chashibu. So it's tea residue. And that, of course, has an interesting smell, an interesting scent again.
And it sort of adds it to the subsequent batches.
It does, yeah. So that's sort of the kamaka, the fragrance of the pan. Is something that's quite significant with Kamairicha.
The pan is called kama.
The kama, yes.
That's where the kamairicha.
That's where the kamairi comes from. It's fried. Iru is to fire or fry or bake, and kama is the pan. Yeah.
All right. I'd also like to ask about one of my particular favorites. How's this? It's kind of specific to the Kyoto region, I've heard. Is Bancha. What do you know about how that's
Is Bancha
made?
is very interesting again. I won't mean this in any denigrating way. I love the tea. It's great tea. I highly recommend everyone to taste it. But it's garbage tea. Basically. I'm not saying it's garbage because it's bad. I'm saying it's garbage because what is used for the tea is basically leaf that would otherwise be thrown away. That's generally true for bancha unless it's harvested specifically for the purpose.
For the purpose of
making bancha.
Right.
So
I guess, so people might wonder, what is bancha specifically? So from what I've...
Let's stick with the first question first. Because if we're going to go into bancha, there's the only concise explanation of bancha that I have is everything that is not
the first washer.
Sencha, kabusecha, gyokuro, kamairicha, wakocha, udoncha, and the main tea types that we know. Everything that is not that is bancha. It's like the other.
Oh, okay. Well, I was at the farm. What I got was that the first flush would be sencha or kabusecha or however, and then after that everything would be bancha. Is that wrong? Like the ni bancha. All right. I guess that wasn't a good question.
Yes. You have, because people make sencha from the second harvest, or you could have a summer harvest used for black tea.
Right.
Or some people harvest 4 times throughout the year But then, of course, we know that's mass production and industrialized tea farming. But some people harvest 4 times a year, and they harvest for sencha.
Okay, so
and everything that is in between those harvesting seasons. So the prunings or the cutbacks of tea trees that have grown too long or have grown too high, those are used for bancha.
Gotcha.
So it's the stuff that they would either just leave on the farm to decompose and become soil, or that they would throw away otherwise. They might gather that and use that as bancha. So you have coarser leaf that is used. Usually bigger twig parts are included as well. But that's not all. It's not only what is, well, the prunings, the cut-offs, etc. It's not only that. It's also what has been filtered out after the processing for sencha, capsucha, gyokuro. You also have, sometimes when you harvest tea leaf that is too big, or you have crumbles and bits that are too small, or you have twigs in there. And the twigs are often used for kukicha or karigane, twig teas. But the larger bits, they call them atama, like heads, those are filtered out from the sencha and the capsucha and the gyokuro again. And those will also become bancha.
Okay.
A different kind of bancha, though, because some people keep them separate.
Wow.
They have bancha from the heads and bancha from the prunings.
There's a whole other world of bancha.
There's a whole other world of bancha. Oh, and that's why I said we shouldn't really get into that. Let's stick with the first one, because every region has its own bancha.
Wow.
If you come to Kyoto and you sit down in a restaurant and say, "Give me some bancha," you get Kyo bancha. If you go to Shizuoka and you sit down and you ask for some bancha, some green tea appears. If you go northern and you ask for bancha, they give you hojicha. If you go to Shikoku, especially around the Tokushima area, if you ask for bancha, you get something really, really sour.
Really?
Because they have this kamikatsu bancha or awa bancha, which is post-fermented in lactic acid.
Oh.
So it's the tea leaf that is, it's not steamed, they boil it. It's boiled, then it's packed together in a big wooden barrel that is lined with lactic acid bacteria. And it's fermented for like several weeks. And then it's taken out, dried. And there's a variation on that some other people I think might know, which is goishicha. The board game Igo.
Ah, yes.
The stone tea. These are like little bricks, like ancient brick tea type.
Oh.
And it's pretty similar to the making process of this awa bancha. Only with awa bancha, the leaf is aired out again and loosed up, and you have this. It almost looks like fallen leaves in a forest. With this goishicha, you have that as well, but it's just cut up in squares and then dried like that.
And to brew it, you just put it in water like that?
To brew it, and you put it in water. There's different approaches to that as well.
Of course.
So, and in Mandokoro, for example, in Shiga, what they do is they steam the tea for 30 minutes.
That's a very long time, isn't it?
But they cut off like immense branches and very coarse leaf. So their regional bancha is again something completely different. So yes, there's a whole realm of bancha. And so if we're talking about Kyo bancha, that's the bancha from Kyoto, which tends to be recognized as something very, very smoky.
Yes.
And that's because it's traditionally produced on a coal fire. And you've got the smoke from the coals, the wood, everything, it gets onto the leaf and it's mixed in. So.
And it's not formed into the leaves or not formed into needles.
If you look at it, it's no, it's not rolled at all.
It's just the leaf just like that.
Steamed and the leaf like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I like it is you put a pot out to make for somebody and it looks like you went out to the forest and took some leaves and you put it in a pot. It doesn't look like it's...
Yeah, it does.
It doesn't look like what people think tea should look like.
And if you're interested in trying this Kyo Bancha, at the Tea Crane we have some Kyo Bancha as well.
Yes.
The Kyo Bancha that we have is the rarest, I must say, one of the only, if not the only, pesticide-free Kyo Bancha. Because Kyo Bancha is a, as I mentioned, garbage type of tea, you use the remains, the rubbish from your harvesting processes, and you take that to one or other, there aren't that many Kyo Bancha production facilities where they throw all the leaf that they've gathered together from all different farms. So there's no traceability. You don't know where the leaf comes from, what has been done to it, who produced it, and what kind of chemicals, etc., that were used or not. So everything is just thrown together and then processed as Kyo Bancha, and everyone just gets redistributed whatever they brought to the facility. So the farmer that I work with is a matcha producer in Kyoto, and she likes to also make this Kyo Bancha. So she brings her prunings and intermediate harvests to this facility and says, please only use my leaf and give me back my leaf. So that we know that it was originally pesticide-free cultivation. And so it's that tea that we also offer. It's the best we can do. I don't think there's
any better
ever soon going to be a Kyo Bancha that is actually certified organic, because there you need a completely different facility for, and the perception of Kyo Bancha is basically this very cheap offhand tea that you get served at restaurants for free.
Yes. Well, it's usually not quite so smoky at restaurants, I've noticed. It's a little bit toned down, but the stuff, if I make it, for example, the bancha that we have here, as well as the, I think I also had some bancha at the tea farm where I was volunteering. It was much, much smokier. Which... Yeah,
Kyo Bancha can be quite a eye-opener,
not for
impressive
everyone,
tea.
I think.
It's not for everyone, no. You either absolutely hate it or absolutely love it, but there's no in-between.
There is no in-between.
I've never heard of an in-between. Someone say, yeah, I don't actually like it, but it's okay. No, it's either not okay or wow.
Right. Are there any other interesting green teas that you like in particular, other than what we've talked about so far?
I think we've covered most. We've talked about kamairicha, which is already different from sencha. We've talked about kabusecha, gyokuro, matcha.
Touched on,
I think that's most of
kukicha even.
We even touched on kukicha. So
all right, then I'd like to move in a little bit about cultivars. So I think this was another question that we've gotten in the past. You also have on your labels, you have, for example, yabukita. And people have asked, how is that different than sencha? Like, why is there both sencha and yabukita on there? What's the difference?
Right. Okay. Let me digest that question first. So, well, sencha is the type of tea like we were just talking about. So you've got sencha, kabusecha, gyokuro. Those are the types of teas. And the difference with that is how it's processed. What kind of tea is made out of it. That's the kind of tea. Yabukita has nothing to do with that. Yabukita is the name of a cultivar species, which is basically the name of a type of tea bush. And cultivars are always grown from cuttings. Usually a tree or a plant is grown from a seed. That's the common way of reproducing, or the natural way, let's say, of reproducing plants. You grow them from seeds. But with tea and with most plants in general, if you grow something from a seed, well, say that you grow two trees from two different seeds, you get two different types of plants. So from those two plants, let's take it very simple. If you say, I like this one better because it produces a better tea, I want to make more of this plant, You can't just take seeds from that plant and plant them again, because you'll get two different types again. It's like with children. Two same parents can't produce the same child twice. Doesn't work. Even nature can't do it. So it doesn't happen. If you want to create the same species or maintain a certain DNA structure, then what you have to do is cloning. And how that is done with tea trees is cuttings are taken. So pieces of branches are cut off. And to those pieces of branches, again, roots are grown.
Oh.
And that's how then a second tree of the same mother plant is made. And so more cultivars are made. And the Yabukita species is one of the earliest discovered tea trees that are very suitable to Japan's climate. Now, I must say, I'm not a fan of the Yabukita cultivar for the simple reason that, take this in consideration, the Yabukita tea tree is taken as the standard to measure all other cultivars by. So all other cultivars are either minus 1, 2, 3 points or plus 1, 2, 3 points.
Really?
As opposed to Yabukita, which means that it's neither bad nor good. It's just standard. To me, it's the most uninteresting kind of tea tree.
Well, maybe that's why it's the standard.
So that's why it's the standard. But the sad thing is, you could take it as a standard and then develop good other tea trees from that and use those. But really, Yabukita is used for over 70% throughout the entirety of Japan's tea production.
Yeah, definitely the most common.
So it's very common. And that is because everyone wants to make the same type of tea. Sencha has to taste the same wherever you produce it. And we talked about that last time because
going back to the consistency.
The consistency, the ease of blending, the having the same flavor year in, year out. You want to create an environment in which that tea tree can grow and in which you can also alter the flavor that it's going to produce. So the Yabukita is a cultivar, and there are many other cultivars. And so let's go back to the thing that we were saying. Yabukita is the standard for other cultivars.
Right.
So it grows well in Japan. It grows good tea. It has a good yield. It is quite cold resistant, which is necessary in Japan. So it has all these factors. And so from the Yabukita, different cuttings are taken and they are distributed throughout Japan. Now, there are many other cultivars as well. And some cultivars are either better for one species of tea or another. For example, there's a whole range of beni cultivars. You've got the beni fuki, the beni homare, the beni hikari. And they are suited for mostly black tea or oxidized tea production.
So they're sort of designed for black tea.
They are
intended for.
They were actually produced mostly from seeds that were taken from Assam in India and then brought here into Japan and planted on Japanese soil. And from the seeds that were planted, the tea trees that did best were then selected. And the very first one that was actually ever selected in Japan was the beni homare. Interestingly enough, the cultivar registration system is actually pretty young. It's pretty new. 1953. And the number one, the cultivar that was
first
registered is the beni homare. The Yabukita cultivar is only number 9 on that list. So initially, cultivars really were looked at for black tea production because in the early 1900s, Japan did a lot of black tea production for export mostly.
Right. which is different from the wakolcha, the Japanese black tea that.
At that time, it must have been different, and definitely they were looking at making something that the British would want to buy.
Yeah.
So imitating basically what was already being produced in other places, like in Sri Lanka, like in India. They would just make something from Japan and also sell that to the English.
So you said that Beni Homare and the other Beni family cultivars are ideal for black teas, but can they also be used to make other kinds?
Like so yes, that's the interesting thing with the tea tree. You can make basically any tea out of any tea plant. Although cultivars really are often selected for their properties and for a specific type of tea. So some tea trees might actually produce more umami flavor, more amino acids naturally. And so they are generally considered better for Gyokuro or matcha production. Whereas tea trees that have more catechins, that are sturdier, etc., that lead themselves better to oxidation fermentation, those are often used for fermented teas, for black tea, for oolong. And the interesting thing is you can produce black tea from a cultivar like the samidori, which is very, very sweet, which is suitable for matcha or gyokuro. But you don't really get the best result.
Right.
It's okay to make it,
but not the best.
It's not the best. For black teas, really, what I've seen in Japan is you don't want those umami flavors. You don't want amino acids in the tea because they don't ferment, they don't oxidize. They're just there, and then they produce umami sweetness in black tea, which is
doesn't really
just in the way.
Yeah,
it's
off. Right. Yeah.
You want actually the catechins and the tannins, the theanine, etc., to alter through the oxidation process and produce those interesting black tea flavors and aromas. But the umami just stays there.
It stays there and gets in the way.
And it gets in the way. And you have a lot of wakocha there. So there's, for people who are looking into wakocha, a lot of the commonly sold wakocha is produced from green tea cultivars, from tea bushes that were even either shaded and the umami has been retained. So I hear a lot of people say, well, we've tried wakocha, but it's not really my kind of thing. Then I already get suspicious of which one did you have? Because if you had one that was produced with tea, green tea intended tea tree,
well, that's not the best wakocha that you could have.
That's not the best you could have. No.
And if you haven't tried wakolcha before, definitely recommend it. Very interesting. Very different from other black teas that I've tried. Very light.
And I now also have an interesting tasting set of the three Beni cultivars, Beni Fuki, Beni Homare, Beni Hikari, with explanation booklet. So it's a tasting set or a gift set. You can use it in whichever way, but it has the three Beni sisters, let's call them, with additional information in it. And you can get it from the Tea Crane website. So check it out.
Yes. All right. I have one last very brief question.
All right. Let's see if I have a brief answer to that.
Hopefully it'll be just yes or no. Are all teas sold one of those main cultivars, or are there still seed-grown teas sold?
I still have 6 minutes, right? Okay. So initially, throughout the history of tea growing, it was all seed grown. So from the time when in the 1200s, and there is tea production before that, but let's just take 1200s as a standard. Up until the point where the cultivar registration system was put in place, which is 1953, That is 750 years
of
tea growing,
grown.
which was all seed grown.
Mm.
Even after 1953, it wasn't until the 70s that really the government started to put work in to force or push everyone in the direction of using the Jabucta cultivar or other cultivar species on their farms and to move away from seed-grown teas. And now there still are a few places, a few farmers that work with seed-grown species and that also are trying to go back to it. For example, our tea farmer Fumiaki Iwata in Nara, he's a big proponent of using seed-grown cultivars, and he's actually now experimenting with growing cultivar species from seed. It's impossible, but what he's trying to do is to take the seeds from a specific cultivar and plant an entire farm of that. And in every spot where he wants one tea tree to grow, because those rows of bushes, those are not one tree. It's different trees that have become intertwined. You might think it's just one tree that just grows like that. No, it doesn't. It's one tea bush is a round shrub, and there's another next to it. And because only the surface is cut off always, they grow into each other and they become this long row. So in every place where he wants one tree to grow, he's put 8 seeds and 8 tea trees come out. And then what he does is he looks at the leaf and the way it develops, and he picks out the ones that are not close at all to the original cultivar that he was intending to grow there. And he aims to, having picked out 7 that don't resemble the mother tea tree, to have tea trees that are as close as possible to the original. Say, for example, he's planting a farm of the Beni Homare cultivar from seed. Then he wants to have seed-grown tea trees that are close to the original Beni Homare species throughout the entire farm.
Wow. Sounds like a lot of very labor-intensive.
It's a very labor-intensive project, but no one else is doing it. And it's very interesting. So
yeah.
I'm very excited to see also how this is going to develop.
Yes. All right, that's all the questions that I had for today.
Great. I think it's a good talk.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of topics. We talked about cultivars, which is a very important topic as well, and a
lot about processing.
A lot about processing.
Kinds of teas.
Yeah. Good talk. Good talk.
Yep.
So for everyone who's watching, we'll be doing these chats more often, more frequently. We'll always announce when we have one scheduled again on Instagram. So be sure to follow the Tea Crane on Instagram. And half an hour before we actually go live, we'll announce it on Facebook and YouTube. So also subscribe to both the YouTube channel and to the Facebook page for the Tea Crane. And if you have any questions, you can always send them in, and I'll always be happy. We can take them on here in our chat as well. So it gives us some good ideas of what you want to know, and so we can also talk about topics that are more interesting for everyone. I think, well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yep.
It was an exciting talk again, and I hope to see you again in our next session. So
thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.